Good morning. You know, as I reflect back on this morning, and sort of to your point, I had a couple of observations on contested logistics personally. The first was the trains, planes, and automobiles and Ubers that got me here from last night to today. True story from Oklahoma City. And the second thought that I had was which Jack Haley story am I going to tell and be able to get away with it today? No, in all sincerity, sir, thanks for the kind introduction. To your point, we've known each other for a long time. I have benefited from your leadership and continue to do so as the AUSA resident logistician. So thanks again for the warm introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Thank you for the warm reception. And thanks for joining me today as we embark on an in-depth exploration of the complex and dynamic world of Army logistics in a globally contested environment. And as I begin, I want to pass along a big thanks to AUSA for hosting this fantastic forum and for extending an invitation to me to participate and speak here today. And Sir General Brown, again, thanks for your leadership going all the way back to our time in the Pacific, as you mentioned. We just appreciate what you're doing as the CEO and president of AUSA. Let's give General Brown a big round of applause, y'all. You know, you and the entire AUSA team are just stalwart advocates of our Army, and we sincerely appreciate it. And it's undoubtedly a privilege to represent the U.S. Army logisticians at this forum. And there are quite a few logisticians here out in the audience, and I can tell you right now, in addition to General Haley, I've had the opportunity to serve with many of you in the audience and learned from each and every one of you. And so what I impart on you today is not myself, it's really a culmination of what and the experiences that I've gained and what I've learned and what you all have poured into me. So thanks a lot. So first, to our uniformed logisticians from across the total Army, the active and the reserve components. You are model professionals, and I'm so proud to serve alongside of you. Second, we have our Department of Defense civilian workforce in the room. Your continuity, coupled with your expert advice, remains a critical component to our success as an Army. And as I look across the crowd, I'm also delighted to see many of our allies and partners from across the world, both in the room and watching virtually. Thank you for making the trip, and thanks for dialing in. You are essential to our collective success across the globe. And as I've seen in previous assignments over many years, we are truly stronger together. It's also exceptional to have so many of you from across the private sector here today. Your contributions to our nation's defense and enablement of Army logistics are superb. You, the Army, and our allies and partners are truly what make the team that we will tackle the demanding challenges and complexities associated with contested logistics. You know, yesterday our Chief of Staff of the Army, General George, spoke in this very room during the AUSA Coffee Series, and it's only fitting that we follow him up with this very, very important topic here. So I submit to you that logistics and contested logistics is going to play an outsized role in our Army. And that said, I believe your time here today is going to be well spent. So what exactly is contested logistics? I bet you if I asked 20 people in the audience today to give me the definition of contested logistics, we'd probably come back with about 20 different variations of that term. We often throw that term around without thinking about its meaning or its implications for the Army and for the joint and the combined force. And it's important that we all have a common understanding of what contested logistics is. And while I won't get too parochial for you, I do want to baseline ourselves and set the tone for the rest of the day. So indulge me just a little bit as I describe how the joint concept for contested logistics, or the JCCL, defines contested logistics. The JCCL defines contested logistics as the act of planning, executing, and enabling the movement and support of military forces across multiple domains and environments, across air, land, sea, space, cyber, and information domains, across the electromagnetic spectrum in a contested environment. That was a lot, and that was a mouthful, but we got through it. So let's just step back for a second. You see, in global conflicts of the 20th century, our homeland enjoyed a relatively geographic safe environment. That said, the competitive and the comparative advantage we enjoyed in the sustainment realm for many decades has eroded. And this is exactly what the JCCL is referring to when it says a contested environment. You see, we'll no longer be able to operate unimpeded, and this includes the homeland as well. In short, we will have no safe harbor as we execute logistics across the globe. And I believe the former Transcom commander, General Lyons, said this first, at least he was the first person to say it that I know. He said, we're going to have to fight to get to the fight. You know, if we're being honest, logistics has always been a contested environment to some degree, as was previously mentioned, particularly at the tactical level. And those who participated in combat logistics patrols in Afghanistan and Iraq, myself included, would certainly count them as contested. However, not since World War II have we been contested at the levels we expect from our modern adversaries. German submarine Wolfpack operations, which led to the cross-Atlantic convoy system, or the Red Ball Express to extend operational reach on the European battlefield, all while being contested by the Luftwaffe, are both mental references for us to understand being contested at scale. And it's important to note that we shouldn't merely observe adversary behavior to understand what it means to be contested. Think supply chain disruptions, pipeline disruptions that cause pain at the gas pumps, or even extreme weather. They all disrupt logistics operations in the public and the private sector and give us a taste of what a contested logistics environment looks like. And this morning, I posit that although logistics has been contested at some level, the sheer scope and the sheer scale of what we anticipate from our adversaries as they attempt to impose their will, and as we continue transitioning our Army from counterinsurgency operations to one prepared to fight large-scale combat operations at echelon, I may add, is greater than anything and anybody in this room can ever imagine. Therefore, the Army must adapt and prepare to meet the challenge head on. And to do so, I submit that we need to take the following actions. Together, we must continue transforming Army logistics to meet the needs of Army of 2030 and the Army of 2040. We must continue modernizing our organic industrial base, or the OIB, to ensure its readiness and its ability to sustain the entire Army and the joint force writ large. We must continue to work closely with our industry partners to procure and implement technologically advanced equipment and innovative ways of doing business. We must continue to strengthen our teamwork and our interoperability with our allies and our partners across the globe. And finally, we must make contested logistics a whole of government and a whole of nation approach. Ladies and gentlemen, these must-dos underpin our ability to ensure our nation is prepared to meet the challenges and the complexities we will face in a contested logistics environment, and positively influence what President Biden has often referred to as the decisive decade. And before I delve into those areas that I just mentioned, I think it's also important to have a shared and a common understanding of our adversaries and their claims, and our understanding that shapes their approach. And it's not lost on many of us that we're witnessing a shift in the competitive landscape, or more bluntly stated, our potential peer and near peer adversaries have studied our operations over decades and learned by watching us. Our national defense strategy sets the People's Republic of China as our primary pacing challenge. Not to mention the Indo-Pacific has emerged as a focal point for global competition. The rapid rise of China's economic, political, and military power has changed strategic dynamics. This theater's intricate dance of power and influence requires a nuanced approach to logistics due to its vast size. The Xi regime seeks to rewrite the world order, and in China's image, one where they do not adhere to international norms. Take the China's Belt and Road Initiative, for example. It looks very promising on the surface to many of the host nations. Loans to improve seaport infrastructure seem like they would only benefit a nation. But often these loans come with a heavy economic price and leave the country open to default and political pressure from China, subsequently increasing China's malign influence and access to these nations. Interesting fact, China owns 7 of the 10 busiest ports in the world and has operations in more than 100 ports in 63 countries. This investment aims at reducing America's international role and our ability to rapidly project forces across the globe. Beijing is accelerating the development of capabilities it believes are required to confront the US in a large-scale, sustained conflict. For example, Log Inc., a port logistics management platform developed by China's Department of Transportation, uses data sharing agreements with foreign ports, and get this, to collect and aggregate deployment and logistics data. Now, this seems pretty harmless on the surface. However, some of these companies either are or could be state-owned enterprises, as we should be concerned about how they might harness that data to our disadvantage. And while not as economically powerful as China, Russia remains an acute threat to our European allies and our partners. Russia also maintains the ability to project influence into the Middle East and on the African continent. Moreover, its actions in Ukraine 2 years ago and up to the present day demonstrate President Putin's utter disregard for international law and national sovereignty. And although weakened by an incredibly resilient Ukrainian armed forces, Russia remains a threat, particularly in the cyber domain, as it refines and employs its espionage, influence, and attack capabilities. And finally, emerging technology, much of which we've seen play out on the battlefield in Eastern Europe and throughout the Middle East, will affect our ability to sustain the force. Think mass proliferation of suicide drones. What a game changer in technology with huge potential to disrupt logistics. Multi-domain operations will only be successful if our logistics community is constantly reevaluating and refining concepts and capability development at speeds commensurate or faster than our adversaries' moves on the global sustainment chessboard, as I like to call it. And before I move on, I want to quickly circle back on a significant challenge that cyber threats pose in our sustainment capabilities. You see, we're almost at the point where none of us in this room could perform our duties without access to the network. And this is particularly challenging and vulnerable as our logistics systems predominantly operate on the unclassified networks. Best believe network dependency is one of our areas that our adversaries will seek to exploit and degrade. And later you'll hear from our network dependency panel who will expand on this topic. Identifying our adversaries and what they're doing in a contested logistics environment, that's the easy part. The hard part is developing solutions to counter their efforts to disrupt our logistics, and which is why I'm glad that we've got such an all-star panel here today. It was mentioned previously this morning, that old adage that infantry wins battles, logistics wins wars. I think you said a little bit different, sir, but it's the same context. Although Army logistics looks a lot different than it did in World War I when General Pershing made that statement, it still holds true today. However, we're literally watching the character of war change. This reality is driving the Army to embrace new ways new doctrine, new tactics, new techniques, new procedures as it transforms to meet future needs. Logistics is shaping the way we shoot, the way we move, the way we communicate in operations across the entire globe. And upon his vesting as the Chief of Staff of the Army, General George outlined his 4 focus areas to shape our Army. They were warfighting, delivering ready combat formations, continuous transformation, and strengthening our profession. And he doubled down on those priorities yesterday. You see, the sustainment enterprise efforts to counter contested logistics can be found within each one of the CSA's focus areas. And though all 4 of his focus areas pertain to logistics, 2 specifically resonate. The first is deliver ready combat formations. The second is continuous transformation. And so in today's first panel, Army in Transition, Sustaining the Army of 2030 and 2040, Major General Donahue, right in front of us, our newly installed CASCOM commander, and Mr. Watts, the Army Futures Command Contested Logistics Cross-Functional Team, will share their thoughts on how the Army logistics community will keep sustainment transformation at pace with Army transformation and continue to deliver ready combat formations. It was spoke on earlier, but last year the Army did establish the Contested Logistics Cross-Functional Team, and I can tell you right now, led by Shane Upton, they are hyper-focused on addressing our capability gaps that exist at this time. They've got 4 lines of effort as well, the first being precision sustainment. They're also focused on multi-capable distribution platforms. They're focused on reducing demand, and they're also focused on advanced power. However, the capability gaps are only one side of the sustainment Rubik's Cube. We also need to take a hard look at how we modify our tactics. How do we modify our doctrine? And as such, CASCOM and Army Futures Command are partnering serious logistician brainpower to address contested logistics across the entire .mil-PF. CASCOM is playing a significant role in helping us appropriately refine recommended force structure and capabilities across logistics formations and across all 3 components of our Army. You see, it's not lost on any of us in this room that 70% of our logistics capability resides in Compo 2 and Compo 3. Thus, the success in a contested environment rests heavily on mobilizing our reserve components. Early employment of these forces is challenging due to deployment timelines required to support combatant command requirements. And we'll hear more about this topic later on today in our final panel, where we'll discuss the homeland from a force projection perspective. The Army also plays a significant role in joint force responsibilities as part of large-scale combat operations. The joint concept for contested logistics aims to synchronize the services' sustainment roles and ultimately enable resilient, integrated logistics command and control, assured power projection, and sustainment for distributed operations. And as part of joint force responsibilities, the Army has several specific executive agent logistics responsibilities that support not only the Army, but the entire joint force. And the joint force can't operate effectively in an ESCO environment without the indispensable role that Army logistics plays. Think bulk water, bulk fuel, think munitions. The Army also has an enormous responsibility for intra-theater distribution. As General Brown said earlier today, you don't have to study a map long to understand that the location of our pacing threat in the Indo-Pacific AOR involves a significant amount of water. And thus, we must evolve our watercraft strategy and capabilities to ensure we meet our intra-theater sustainment responsibilities. And in this vein, we have to nest our sister services LESCO requirements to underwrite their lethality as well. We must determine how we mutually support one another across our varying roles and responsibilities. Ladies and gentlemen, what that means is we've got to break down our traditional barriers between our services, and we got to get out of our stovepipes. And I had the distinct opportunity to serve on the Service 4 panel yesterday in Oklahoma City. And I can tell you right now, we are all in violent agreement. We must transform the joint force together. We must train together because you can rest assured we're going to fight together. We're already seeing this in action as we conduct joint and combined exercises, training and operations in the Pacific with Talisman Sabre, and in Europe, we conduct assure and deter operations alongside of our NATO allies. Internal to the Army, it's crucial that we integrate sustainment at all echelons rather than merely deconflict it, because sustainment is more than a warfighting function. Sustainment is warfighting. It is the competitive and the comparative advantage we'll need to win. And as mentioned, I've had the distinct honor of commanding both at the Theater Sustainment Command and the Expeditionary Sustainment Command level. TSCs and ESCs are integral to multi-domain operations and provide the critical sustainment backbone necessary for the successful execution of joint military operations. And by nesting TSC and ESC sustainment responsibilities with our sister service requirements, the Army and the Joint Force can better prepare for future challenges. We're actively exercising the TSCs and ESCs muscles in training operations to identify friction points. And more importantly, our partners in the Navy and the Marine Corps and the Air Force are more actively participating in critical Army-led operations like Operations Pathways. And all that said, we can't simply train and exercise our way out of this challenge in front of us. We must, I repeat, we must have an agile organic industrial base, an OIB able to provide surge capacity, an OIB postured to reconstitute degraded combat power, an OIB that can surge repair and added manufacturing capability forward at the point of need. And last fall, General George assigned Army Material Command as the lead for the Deliver Ready Combat Formations focus area. AMC is actively collaborating with other strategic partners to include Transcom, Defense Logistics Agency, and Air Force Material Command, and others to properly resource and modernize the ORB capabilities and the shortfalls that exist across our entire joint logistics enterprise. And shifting real quick to supply chain vulnerabilities, we fully anticipate that our strategic adversaries will employ capabilities and tactics that target the supply chain links, the very links that connect our industrial base in the homeland with our forward deployed forces. And without question, we're in an active global competition for scarce resources. And this is particularly true with respect to materials and rare earth metals, 70% of which are made in China. Think of the disruption that could occur to our operations if we had limited or no access to many of the products that require these metals. Put bluntly, we have to work to increase our industrial base production and modernize our facilities. We have to be clear-eyed in understanding resources are finite and MilCon dollars are expensive. Long-term planning becomes even more important as we make targeted investments to modernize our defense manufacturing base and power projection platforms and logistics hubs. And during today's second panel, you'll hear how we're working to boost readiness globally across the Army, but particularly in our OIB, and how we're modernizing it to meet the needs of a contested logistics environment. And to General Haley's earlier point, moreover, no longer can we rely on those iron mountains to posture for a future let's go fight. These massive stockpiles of the past are inefficient, they're unaffordable and unattainable based on the threat that we have today. For example, our Army pre-position stocks have and will continue to serve a vital role in deterrence and combat operations, but we're beginning to look very hard on how we disperse these strategic assets more effectively to keep them both ready and available for use at the point of need. And to our industry partners here today, I think you all know that the OIB alone will not amply sustain our Army. We absolutely need you, each and every one of you, to walk this journey with us as you have for decades. To work with us to meet the industrial-based needs of a contested logistics landscape. Our symbiotic relationship is critical to our collective ability to sustain operational endurance, and staying power. From autonomous supply chains to cutting-edge communication systems, our defense industrial base plays an indispensable role in equipping the Army with the tools necessary to navigate contested logistics successfully. The modern battlefield requires the Army sustainment community to embrace the flexible and the tech-savvy approach, incorporating advancements such as autonomous supply chains, sophisticated data analytics, and state-of-the-art communication systems. And these technologies not only will enhance sustainment efficiencies, but also contribute to the overall strategic advantage of the United States. The integration of cutting-edge technologies becomes not just an option, ladies and gentlemen, it's a necessity. As I've learned in Ukraine, advancements in communication technology have allowed us to perform telemaintenance, diagnosing and repairing non-mission capable equipment forward in the battle space from relatively safe locations in other parts of the region or even across the ocean right here in the United States. And to that point, we must make targeted investments in autonomous and semi-autonomous and robotic logistics equipment that have practicality in contested areas. And I know commercial industry is already producing such capabilities to satisfy the needs of the global consumer. Now's the time, though, that we got to leverage it and maintain our competitive advantage over our adversaries. And our partners at AMC and AFC are the connective tissue to industry to enable the Army to access and leverage what the private sector can offer. However, modernized equipment and tech-enabled industrial base alone cannot solve all of our problems. There will be a time when we have modernized equipment and legacy equipment. In short, legacy is not a four-letter word for me. In reality, we're going to have to fight with the equipment that we have. And we'll need industry's help in ensuring that our supply chains for our legacy equipment remains open while you also help transform us in contact. And we also may need to develop innovative ways to do this, as many of the repair parts that I'm talking about are no longer produced. Warfare has changed since we last modernized, and past ways of thinking, past ways of organizing, and past ways of executing are inadequate to keep pace, much less outpace our potential adversaries. As mentioned earlier, the modern battlefield requires a tech-savvy approach, and this will require industrial innovation to integrate technologies and capabilities into military systems much faster than we're presently doing. And many of you in industry know that data is key to logistics. Data analytics, artificial intelligence, machine learning improve our ability to reduce demand, become predictive, and deliver sustainment with precision. The ability to collect, to transport, to analyze, to decide, and to act on data at echelon while protecting and securing the data requires a capability that has achieved the highest level of resiliency in a contested environment. And we'll need your continued partnership to be successful in this area. We've long been after a standard operating environment for all commodities, including medical logistics, across many information sources to inform commanders' decisions. And to manage this, the Joint Logistics Enterprise must integrate commercial, military, joint, and multinational data to provide one common operational picture. And although challenging, I believe with our partnership, we can accomplish what we long sought after across the entire sustainment community. And our partnerships don't just stop with the joint force in industry. Like much of our logistics operations we witnessed over the past 20 years during the war on terror, we're stronger together. We innovate, develop, and sustain the Army better when we take a holistic, multinational teaming approach. Rarely in the course of American history have we gone to war by ourselves. From our French allies during the Revolutionary War to the 42 nations who contributed to the International Security Assistance Force mission in Afghanistan, through the years, our alliances have often done what Secretary of Defense Austin described last year as raising the cost of coercion and aggression by those who seek to rewrite the rules of the road and unilaterally change the status quo. You see, strong alliances and partnerships make it increasingly harder for our adversaries to operate with impunity. So what does this look like multinationally in a contested environment? And how do we integrate and collaborate on logistics to make ourselves more efficient and capable ally and partner? After all, historically, logistics has been a national responsibility. Rarely do we have the intersection of logistics capabilities and requirements across national lines. And I submit to you that in LESCO, we must achieve more than just logistics interoperability that we've begun to strive for. By interoperability, I mean the ability to routinely act together coherently, effectively, and efficiently to achieve tactical, operational, and strategic objectives. Interoperability is not a new term. However, more recently, I've heard the goal described not as interoperability, but interchangeability. And that's a nuanced and change of words, but it's a tectonic shift in thought. It changed the way that we should conduct our logistics operations. Think repair parts for equipment and vehicles, having the ability to substitute material products or commodities multinationally to achieve our objectives. At a minimum, we must develop the ability to interchange repair parts, fuel, and munitions to logistically enable operational reach in large-scale combat operations. And what we did as a nation in Europe in the 70s and 80s with NATO standardization comes to mind as an example. And although we never fully achieved interchangeability, as demonstrated by the vast array of NATO equipment that we've got on hand in Ukraine right now, in contested logistics, leveraging and coordinating with allies and partners is crucial for expanding the operational reach of our combat forces. We got to leverage acquisition and cross-service agreements and mutual logistics support agreements. They're both vital to the environments where traditional supply lines are disrupted under threat. Simply put, we will be contested by our adversaries. Therefore, we must work together to solve this wicked problem. And another point are our partners and allies. The Assistant Secretary of Defense for Sustainment, Honorable Chris Lohman, has highlighted the importance of thinking or rethinking the way that we conduct our maintenance and repair and overhaul capabilities. And what he's come up with is an emergent regional sustainment framework. And with that framework, we'll look at reducing the time that we have to return equipment back to the United States and instead seek opportunities abroad to leverage the capabilities of our partners and allies in concert with their defense industrial base. And I already commented on the necessity to pivot from those Iron Mountains. Enhancing our partners' relationships is going to shift that mountain. So we're leveraging their capability. I've mentioned competitive advantage a couple of times this morning, and our adversaries are keenly aware that a primary competitive advantage of ours lies in the ability to play the away game, our ability to surge combat power rapidly and deliver it anywhere in the world to deter aggression. Our adversaries conduct espionage and malign influence campaigns. They leverage public investment. They own state-owned enterprises, and they utilize cyber and space-based capabilities to gain access to, obtain placement within our U.S. national security interests. Emerging capabilities, both kinetic and non-kinetic, aim to impede our access and slow down or stop our ability to force project from the homeland and access our lines of communication we depend on to get to the fight. Which brings me to the point that a whole of government approach is necessary to conduct global large-scale operations in the modern era. The Department of Defense is a consumer of U.S. highways, rail lines, airports, and seaports. Yet we need access to project our forces to the fight and sustain them during large-scale combat operations. Importantly, we must collaborate with other government agencies, such as the Department of Transportation and Homeland Security, to ensure that we have resilient, modern port, road, and rail networks that will enable the Department of Defense to project forces. To that end, our final panel this morning is focused on force projection and how we overcome the challenges of being contested while deploying forces and sustaining them. And after all, our adversaries understand that our national strength rests in our ability to project combat power anywhere in the world at a place and time of our choosing. That said, they will likely attempt to interdict this across multiple domains. Whole of government could very well expand to whole of nation, from a sustainment perspective, and we should give this thought. We should give this serious consideration. Again, we must go to our history, for example. You see, back in World War II, resources were in high demand as the U.S. joined the war effort. The U.S. and allied militaries required vast amounts of armament, food, clothing, and transportation, leaving many civilians with fewer resources and options. Think products like nylon, steel, and rubber. They became scarce, ultimately affecting available consumer products. And it was a unique time in American history where the citizenry went without to help the war effort. Let's hope, my friends, that we never face that again. But that is precisely the level of national commitment that I'm describing when I say whole of nation. To wrap up, this morning I broadly shared what the Army Logistics Enterprise is doing to address contested logistics. What I described is challenging. What I described is a complex, wicked problem. On its surface, some may say it's not even solvable. I say that as professional sustainers, we have to really lean into these wicked problem sets. Logistics is our competitive and comparative advantage. And I'm relying on the collective brain power of everyone here today and those who you represent to decode the complexities, to break down our stovepipes between organizations and partners and allies, and ensure that we are prepared to meet this challenge head on. Again, we've got some great panels lined up for you today. I look forward to the dialogue and the campaign of learning. I think we've got a short break next. If we've got time, I'll entertain a question or two. If not, I'm going to be available all day to answer any one of the questions.
Jen, where are you? I'll let you ask the question.
Take one.
Thank you. Hi, Jen Judson with Defense News. I wrote my question on a card, but you probably wouldn't be able to read it anyway. I wanted to know if you could provide a few examples in maybe the last year or so where you have leveraged capability within the industrial base of allies, perhaps at Talisman Sabre or something like that, in terms of when you were talking about the emergent regional sustainment framework that you're looking into.
Yeah, sure, Jen. Thanks for the question. And I'll tell you, it's not theater specific. We're leaning into this hard from a global perspective. I can tell you right now, one initiative that we're looking at right now. I talked a little bit about our Army watercraft strategy, and so if you look at how we maintain our watercraft through the service life extension programs or on condition cyclic maintenance, a lot of times that equipment, those watercraft are coming back to the States, to get repaired. What we're taking a hard look at is what repairs can we make in the theater of operations to keep the watercraft on a tighter tether, as I would call it, shorten the time that it's off station, and ensure that the combatant commander has the capability that it needs when it needs it. So that's an example right there. Another example is we exercise our equipment as part of our Army pre-position stocks, and as part of exercising it, we're also conducting maintenance on that equipment as well, as opposed to bringing it all the way back to theater. The maintenance that's being performed is really at the benefit of our host nation partners in theater. And so those are two discrete examples of where we're working hard to leverage the capabilities of our host nations. Jen, I hope that answers your question. Great, thanks.
Sir, thank you for being here. Great start to the morning.
Yeah.
Let's give General Smith a big round of applause.